Well, I just want to point out a funny statement that my father told me when I was young. It's probably a wise saying that maybe your own parents have told you, you've heard through someone else. But it's the three ways that we really learn in this life. And it's the main three ways. We could probably argue about, other ways we can learn, but primarily I feel like this is a good way to categorize how we learn. My dad said one of the ways we learn is from watching someone do something. If you watch your friend stick his hand on a stove and he burnt his hand, you're probably gonna think, I'm not gonna do that. Another way you can learn is someone telling you, hey, Jay, don't put your hand on the stove because you're gonna burn yourself if it's red and it's hot. And I could listen to that person. But then there's the third way, which many of us, especially if there's some part of pride in us, is that we want to do it ourselves. We want to learn the way we want to learn through our own experience, through our own times and trials. And so that would be a good example to say, I went up to the stove and I stuck my hand on the stove because I wanted to know what it felt like, and I burnt my hand. And I learned I don't ever want to do that again. And although that might be a poor example, it's really kind of the way we do learn. And you could expand that on good or bad ways, the way that we choose how to live our lives. You could see someone in your life that you want to look up to, that you do look up to, that you want to follow along the same path. And you can learn just by watching that person how you want to live your life. Then you could watch someone make a poor decision and poor choices, and you can say, I don't want to go down that path. I don't want to live my life that way. Then there's times that you ask someone to teach you those things and tell you how they live their life, and you can listen to their words of wisdom. And then there's times, especially when we're young, and so whether you're old, you're in the middle of your life, or you're kind of young like me, you probably have made decisions where you're like, I'm gonna do my own thing, I'm gonna trek my own trail, and I'm gonna see where it takes me. And you might learn a lot from that moment, but there's probably a lot of pains you could have learned in other situations, in other people's lives by watching them. I would say that the Bible has a prime example of this example of way to learn. I think the best way to learn is simply just by watching someone make a decision and thinking, that is not what I want to do. Let's look at one of the huge people of the Bible, King David. King David has more, words and passages written to him other than Jesus. I mean, he's a big part of the Bible. And it's funny that when King David, when he was the son of Jesse, when he was a nobody, he would have never thought he would be anything important. He brings food, because his father told him to his brothers at a time of war. And at this time of war, what do we see happening? We see this giant, this Goliath, blaspheming the name of God. And David is riled up. He's a man of God. He's full of the Spirit. And he says, I'll slay this giant. But when he meets King Saul, the king of Israel at that time, where is he? Kings should be on the front lines. Kings should be there, right there to face the giants, face the enemy every single time. But it says that King Saul was in his tent. And King David goes there and says, well, he's not the king yet, it's just David. And he says, I'm going to slay this giant. He can't put on the armor, so he gets his stone and his stick and he slays the giant. Years later, you see King David get anointed and become the king of Israel. So now David's the king. He's running Israel. We see later on in his life a similar situation. It said, at the time when kings were usually at war, because they're supposed to be there, they're supposed to be in the front line, it said David was in his home in Israel. He was in his temple in Israel. He was not where he should have been. I like to say that David was in his own tent. King David was not where he should have been. He was at his own tent. And in that decision, we see King David make a very grave mistake by sleeping with Bathsheba, by killing Bathsheba's husband, and thereon and so forth. I wonder if the Bible is more than just reading to us so that we can have wise saying and wise words and feel proud of who we are and what we know. I wonder if the Bible is more than us knowing these passages in Scripture so we can rebuke someone to our left or to our right. I wonder if the Bible is more than just some ancient text that's beautiful and written and inspired by God. I wonder if the Bible is meant to read you and me. Maybe the Bible is meant to give us lessons and ways we can learn, ways for us to understand how we should live our lives. And so I encourage you today, guys, if you're in a situation, make sure you listen to those around you if they're wise. Make sure you pay attention in the season you are in now, because there might come a day when maybe you're standing on your own kingdom. You're standing in your own place of greatness, and you might be given the same situation that you saw when you were younger. Will you learn that lesson? Will you remember? Will you recall those moments? Use the Bible to read you, to speak life into you, and for you to learn lessons to take into your own life, primary, first, before you take it to others. I believe this with all my heart, and I hope that we together as the body of Christ can continue to learn from these lessons of the Bible. Just remember, there's 3 ways to learn. Someone can tell you what to do, someone can show you what to do, or you can do it yourself. But in the end, the real question is, do we remember our lessons?